Leslie Willcocks. I'm a professor here in the Department of Management, and I have a very long history, which probably is about 35 years in information technology. Now, I never wanted to get into information technology. I studied history at Cambridge University, and then joined an accounting firm and hated it. And they said, well, we have this embryonic management consultancy organization. Why don't you join that? And very quickly, I found I was on IT projects about which no one knew anything, including the client. So I spent 10 years learning how to do IT, mainly in project management, I suppose you'd call it, retrospectively. And then I thought, my brain's not adequately taxed here, so I wanted a semi-academic role, and eventually ended up at Oxford University in their Templeton College, which was their surrogate management department, which morphed into Said Business School. And then subsequently I became a professor here after a little stay at Warwick. In all that, I've followed everything about information technology and written about it. And by about 2014, I became very interested in automation to see if there was any there, which is my favorite hobby, finding out whether there's any there. And that's what tonight's going to be about. So I'm going to start on time now and miss all that out and say that there are a number of administrative things that you need to know. The first thing is that if the fire alarm goes off, it's serious. There's no drill. Head out that way and head out down the stairs to Lincoln's Inn Fields. The second thing is I'm not going to take any questions because we have 35 minutes at the end for questions and discussion. So bear with me up until about 7:20 and then tell me to get off. And the question, hopefully we'll have microphones, but you have microphones in front of you, don't you? To ask the questions with. I think this is a very exciting area. Certainly makes me not just curious, but relatively excited, because I just don't know what's coming over the hill. And what is really interesting is, unlike most academic subjects, people actually are interested and ask me, what's going to happen next? What have you found out? That really is quite cheering, because otherwise academia is the loneliness of the long-distance runners, the lost souls, as it were, of employment. So, moving automation to the next phase. I'm assuming you're all alumni of this great and glorious institution. No, not all of you? Okay. Well, you missed out, but never mind. You can make up for it a little bit today. You might not have an amazing interest in automation, but I can assure you that in the next 5 years sometime you're going to have to get very curious about this, because it's going to impact on a lot of people, and it's not going to look obvious. It's a bit like the tide coming in, you know. You look at it and you say, oh, that hasn't moved, it hasn't moved, and then suddenly you're caught and you can't make land anymore. So you've got to be very careful with this. Anyway, we're in a very interesting stage. So, moving automation to the next phase. The way that we do research, essentially, is to go into organizations and see how technology is developed and deployed. And the development is quite interesting, especially if you're technically minded. The deployment is absolutely interesting, because when technology hits an organization, no one really knows what's going to happen. And there are lots of unanticipated consequences. So, not surprisingly, our research base is very evidence-based. You can see there that over 4 years, not only have we written 4 books, but we've looked at 354 detailed deployments of automation. We're going to look mainly at robotic process automation, the more primitive form, but increasingly organizations like your own are getting into what I call cognitive automation. I'm going to try hard not to use the words artificial intelligence today, because as you will see, it's largely hype in terms of business applications, but it's a catch-all, very sexy phrase that is used in order to make this thing be even more hype than it is. We'll come into that in a minute. So there are 4 books. If you want details of them, I've left some pamphlets and a copy of the one that came out 1 week ago, and also my cards if you want to follow up on this for any particular reason. So we're first going to have a look at, I'm going to give you a progress report. I've been looking at this very, very carefully, and people who are investing in this area sort of telephone me sometimes, so I have to keep very abreast of this. And there are some shocks here for you if you only read the headlines of major newspapers and the media. Some of you might be more in depth than that, in which case they won't be quite so shocking. The first thing to say is that potentially this is extremely powerful technology. In terms of robotic process automation, which is automating very simple processes and tasks that you can write a set of instructions for that uses structured data, what it does is it takes a robotic process and then it automates it. So a robotic process is one that's usually done by people, but it's so mind-numbingly de-skilled that actually we call it a robotic process. So this is software that, in my words, takes the robot out of the human. That's as good a way as explaining it, and everyone's nicked that phrase ever since. So that's what RPA is. And the other promising area that everyone goes on about as if RPA has been bypassed, it hasn't, it's a very embryonic market, is cognitive automation and AI. Now, my set piece on this is the power of RPA is the reality. It works if well managed. The power of cognitive is the promise. The power of AI at the moment is the hype. And that's where we are at this precise moment. It's going to change quite quickly, but I will go into what these 3 things are in a minute. But it is very powerful because it's generic and you can apply it to many different kinds of processes across sectors. It's also relatively cheap. I want to park that one in a minute because the total cost of ownership can be very high, but it starts off as relatively cheap. So where we are with this, and here's your first surprise, okay? Where we are with this is that this market is extremely small. You would think that the AI market, the way that you read about how AI is going to take over all your jobs tomorrow, that this would be a very large market. Now, the investment is large. About $74 billion globally will be invested in things called AI this year. But the size of the market, what is being sold and used in businesses, is about $5 billion this year, $5 billion. Remembering that the IT market is trillions of dollars. So this is the first shock. Why are they writing all this stuff about AI when A, AI doesn't actually exist in businesses, and B, so far as automation exists, it's a very small market. We're in the world of counterfactuals here. We're in the world of massive hype going on in an embryonic exponential growth market. What is actually happening? No questions. Write it down, though. What is actually going on is there's this robotic process automation market. There are about 54 vendors in that market, and although it's all called RPA, they deliver it in different ways, and it's not the same at all. So you can be very careful what you choose. There can be just straightforward desktop RPA, where you automate a desktop process. There can be RPA that's linked with your enterprise systems. There can be do-it-yourself kits, where you have a easy user application interface, which you then have to code using IT developers. Increasingly, there's cloud RPA, bringing digital workers down from the cloud to work on your particular jobs on a rent-a-robot basis. That's all works if well managed. Cognitive automation is the promise. Everyone's trying to now link RPA with automation tools. And these are visual processing, image processing, natural language programming, algorithms, machine learning, using quite traditional statistics, in fact, but based on, and this is the differentiator, highly powerful processors and memory. That's what's making the difference. We couldn't do most of this before at this speed. And it becomes cheap to do. And what you're trying to do increasingly with cognitive automation linked with RPA are those sorts of things down there in the bullet points. Working with unstructured data, converting it into information, working with natural language processing, doing reasoning exercises, trying to do predictive analytics, these sorts of things. And as I said, AI is over there. We scoured the planet for 4 months looking for examples of AI for our next book, and we couldn't find one operational business application like that operated in an RPA or in cognitive space, not one. Excluding the top technology companies who've invested massively in this, and ministries of defense across the globe. That's where we are. I mean, it's just a fact. We will move fast on this, I suspect. And of course, I'm not even looking at the dark world, where an awful lot of AI might be being processed, but clearly I don't know very much about that. I don't have research access. Now, interestingly, this RPA is sold as relatively easy to do. In fact, it's originally sold as you can bypass the IT department and the prioritization queue. You can do it cheaply. You don't need IT developers. You can get it onto your desk almost within weeks. You can be automating a process. Now, a lot of that has happened, but what has actually happened by October 2019 is that a lot of projects have stalled, been abandoned, not been able to scale, because it's one thing to automate particular processes, another one to spread it through an enterprise level, stick it on your servers, relate to the IT function and the IT department, pass through all the security, audit, change management controls, all this sort of stuff. So the results so far have been very mixed. And I think I would add 3 significant things that come out of our research we did for our book. First of all, as I've already indicated, there's an enormous amount of RPA washing, all right, which means there's an awful lot of hype in this area. Lots of overstating capabilities, overselling, everyone calling things AI when they don't actually have AI capabilities, everyone calling things RPA when they all do different things. You had to badge it as RPA in order to get it accepted in the marketplace. The really interesting, significant findings is that looking across our actually more than 450 deployments now, the world splits into 4 kinds. And you can find this even outside automation markets. You can find this about any new change coming into an organization. And certainly for automation, we found that only 20% of organizations are leaders in this area, are strategically utilizing automation. Only 20%. There are 25% who are trying to get there, but fail on a number of issues. There are 35% who are basically laggards, who are pretty lost in this space. And there are 20% who haven't even really started, don't really get it at all. Now, that's quite a shocking finding if you're superficially reading the journals and the media, because it says that really only 20% get it. And yet, this is meant to be a relatively easy technology to deploy and cheap. So what's going wrong here? Well, that leads us to the third point, which is what's going wrong is what has always gone wrong, and I speak from bitter experience with IT, which is 25% of it is a technical problem, 75% is about management and organization. And this comes out time and again. I remember writing those words first in 1987. Time and again, it was, you go in and you think it's a technical problem. bring in your technologists, and you start working away, and they go, well, no, that's not the real problem. The real problem is they hate it. Or the real problem is that lot are not buying it. That lot fears for their jobs. We aren't set up to do this. The IT function doesn't like it. And there's 1,001 reasons, nothing to do with the technology, everything to do with the way that the management manages, the way we're organized, the culture of the organization, things like that. So that's the fundamental finding there. The other thing we found when we wrote our first book in 2016, we only studied successes, which is, notoriously a stupid thing to do. But anyway, we just wanted to find if there was any there. Was anyone being successful? And it turned out that there were a number, and we publicized the case studies, and we thought this is a no-brainer. And we actually misidentified the fact that when more and more organizations enter the marketplace and buy this stuff, they will struggle. And sure enough, by 2017, they were struggling, which led to our second book, which identified 41 material risks you will incur across the life cycle of a project unless you mitigate them through a series of action principles, which we also discovered at the time. I think there are about 47 of those. So we know what the risks are, and we know how to mitigate them. But it is very, very challenging for people who don't get that right from the start. So the result is that by the time we get to October 2019, only 13% of organizations that deploy automation do it strategically to scale. Only 13%. Then again, if you're afraid of the automation bogeyman, you can see that you haven't got much to be afraid of in the next 3 to 5 years, because this is going to exponential growth, but from a very low-lying point. So the work this is an interesting fact, that we wrote a book on cognitive automation in 2018, thinking that the market would quickly get into cognitive automation, highly sophisticated technologies, realize the benefits and want more and more. By the time we got to March 2019, we discovered that wasn't happening. We were originally going to write a book called How AI Took Over the World. That's what the publisher half jokingly said the next book should be called. Unfortunately, our next book isn't called that. It's called Becoming Strategic with Robotic Process Automation. In other words, we had to take a step back to get to where businesses actually were. And we think we've got 18 months of life in that book, because that was how long it's going to take them to get up to speed to where I'm just going to signal now. So, and this is based on just the leaders, the 20% of the organizations that are good at automation. The rest of them have the bits of this, but they won't have all of it. And even the leaders don't have number 7, which we had to devise, and we'll see what they are. I'm going to have a slide on each of these 7 just to run quickly through this, because the exciting stuff is the end bit where we're looking at the future and what's going to happen. So let's just get this out the way, leading practices. The first interesting thing is that most organizations seem to believe in hard learning. They go through the phases in that order. They start fairly ignorant and want return on investment from their, usually cost savings, from their automation, and you have to provide a cost-benefit analysis. They then eventually learn that we can do a bit better than that, but we focus primarily on cost savings. They go through learning hard way, bad mistakes, learn good practices, and eventually, after about 3 years, get to phase 3 if they haven't abandoned it along the way. What we argue is that you can actually get to phase 3 day 1 if you focus on becoming strategic with robotic process automation, by which I mean you do the things that we describe in a minute, and secondly, you link your RPA with your cognitive, with your digital strategy to your business strategy. and you try to achieve digital transformation for business value, that should be the driving force behind becoming strategic. Very few organizations have got to phase 4 at the moment, but we know a number of them. The second thing on that list was, I think, culture change, wasn't it? Let's go back a bit. Yeah, culturally embedded versus IT as usual. Now, I don't know your backgrounds, but I would guess you're not totally familiar with the IT function, which I've been dealing with for most of my life. The IT function is not a great catalyst of change, organizational change. Although what it owns, as it were, the IT is a potential transformation agent, catalyst for change. So the only way you really get change through using automation or information technology is by changing your culture from being highly functional and throwing all your problems technologically over the fence to the IT function to bringing business into the equation. And this diagram just gives you one indicator of what that looks like. So here, what we're saying is that if you really wanted to operate automation, you do need to have some sort of center of excellence. And you do have IT having hugely important roles relative to that. But that would be staffed by a bunch of people who are expert in the technology and the processes that you need to change and automate. But if you don't have the top layer, business sponsors, subject matter experts from the business, program champions from the business, and executive champions from the C-suite, if you don't have that layer, this does not become strategic, because you're still running it as business as usual. IT is responsible for everything. We don't take this seriously as a strategic weapon, and we therefore remove ourselves from the top layer. This only works seriously if you've got that group of 4 at the top in place. So you can actually go in any organization, and I've done this recently, very big German company, manufacturing company, well-known globally, very good company. But does it know how to run automation? No, it doesn't. And I put this diagram out and said, okay, who have we got on the job here at this company? I'm hesitating to call it a name. And sure enough, you found that the top 4 were highly depopulated. And I said, this is why you're not getting any traction whatsoever on automation. So that's one issue. The third issue is, I think, let's go back again, was planning versus opportunism. Now, RPA in particular doesn't help itself here, because RPA has been sold as a quick win opportunistic tool. Forget the IT department, forget senior executives, just get that tool in your business unit, in your back office, in your shared service. You can run it, get a quick win. Okay, and a lot of people have done that. But to become strategic, you have to stand back from that and think what the end point's going to be in 3 to 5 years' time. And the end point is that those people who go for opportunistic quick wins only seriously lack ambition, because the leaders here are getting multiple business benefits from this. Every one of those, I know, can be delivered. In fact, it's more exciting than that. Amongst the leaders, they deliver all of these benefits from their automation. So we call it a triple win. You not just get shareholder value, return on investments between 30 to 200%, unheard of in IT. Hours back to the business, shop direct, we invented the term, an online retail company. They get 950,000 hours back to the business, hours saved as a result of automation this year. An interesting, unanticipated one for many, but they now do it deliberately. regulatory compliance, which if you're working in anybody working in financial services, to back me up here, how many times does a new regulation come out? You don't know. It's about 2 or 3 times a week. So if you can automate the process of regulatory compliance, which firms do, that takes them, without automation, 3 months and 35 new hires to get the regulatory compliance in place. It takes them 6 weeks and just the tool that they've already got to automate, if you do it down this route. That becomes a very exciting area. Then you've got an unexpected area, or at least in 2017, you get enhanced customer journeys. You get removing the pain points for customers as a result of applying automation. And then, surprisingly, you get the unanticipated value to employees. Now, we have to explain this a little because you'll all be aware of the job killer headlines, yes? Which I'm always furiously trying to debunk. There's quite a nice article which debunks it in the LSE Business Review, which I wrote about 3 weeks ago. Have a look at that, it's online. But essentially, why do employees embrace this technology, which is what we've found across 450 deployments? Well, you've got to consider their positions. Generally speaking, there's a dramatic increase in the amount of work to be done in every organization. We'll come to the reasons for that later. Generally speaking, people are experiencing skill shortages. In addition to all that, there's been work intensification. People are being given more work to do, more other people's work to do, and jobs are expanding in that way. And fourthly, there's a budget shortage to do much else. So people find themselves in a situation where they're doing an awful lot of work that is really drudgery, and it's stopping them from doing the interesting stuff and the work that actually adds business value. I once interviewed someone for my first book, 1987, American executive, and I said, so what's your feeling about technology? And he said, well, I can tell you one thing. The problem with American business is that there are too many idiot jobs and not enough idiots to fill them. And this is precisely the situation we're in that automation plays into. There's not enough idiots to fill them. These people can be released and be doing other things and be better employed elsewhere in the organization. And there are a number of other things that employees are finding to their advantage as a result of automation. So far from what the news media tells you, automation doesn't take over people's jobs. It's more a coping mechanism. People are getting into automation not to get rid of people, but to catch up with the amount of work that is overloading them. And this is true of whole societies. Japan, because of its demographics. China, because of its demographics. China will be short of 650 million full-time equivalents by 2025 unless it automates. And it still will be down. Yes, I know it's surprising. Japan is automating like crazy as well. And when you look across the world's major economies, and you'll be surprised how many have skills shortages and demographics that suggest that we're going to not meet our productivity targets and our economic growth targets. Let me move on anyway. The fourth one is program governance versus project delivery. All the leaders have very strong program governance day one. They set it up day one before they do anything else, by which I mean the rules of the game, the constitution, who does what, who controls what budget. And what they then do is they allocate some of the governance for business applications to business units people and senior executives. They allocate some of the technology strategy to the IT function and IT specialists. And they create a governance structure, usually an automation center of excellence as its deputy, which basically operates all automation going forward, including innovation increasingly. The fifth thing I say is that this is moving from being a tool to a platform. And that's when you start getting excited when you use the word platform these days. Because, and think of it another way, what we're on the cusp of is that automation previously was basically used to patch over legacy systems and legacy problems and suboptimal processes. It's now moving, just as we speak, into being a robust, flexible platform into which you can stick and add on cognitive automation tools and do a lot more. So the move now for the vendors, the systems integrators, the people who've got cognitive automation tools, and the enterprise software producers is to create integrated automation platforms. That is exactly what we're doing now for the next year. And these will become relatively mature within about 2 years. So this will give people a lot more opportunities resulting from the enhanced technologies that come from this process. But it's all ongoing at the moment and embryonic. The sixth thing I say is it's about change management, particular behavior management, not management in silos. Now, I suspect if you're all working in really large organizations, this will ring a bell with you. The 7-siloed organization. This is what stops change in your organization. It's not because necessarily people don't want to change. I think people get a really raw deal on the idea that they resist change. It's actually that the organization and the way it's set up resists change. And think about that. So here are the 7 silos. Tick the box if you've got one of these seriously, all right? And then we'll see how many have got 5 to 7. So you are siloed in terms of structure. You are siloed in terms of managerial mindsets. You are siloed in terms of culture. You are siloed in terms of processes. You are siloed in terms of skills. You are siloed in terms of data, and you are siloed in terms of technology. How many have got 5 to 7 of those in a serious way? Which companies? No, don't name them. What sectors are you in? Technology. Sorry? Tech. Okay, yeah. Anybody this side? Yeah? Education. Yes, we're very siloed. Yeah. Anyone else? You don't recognize this siloed organization? Any organization here very good at innovation and change? Put your hand up. Yours are? Which sector? Consulting. Right. Anybody else? Okay. Not bad, yes? All right, well, think about this, because what might be dragging you back is not what you think is dragging you back. It just might be the whole way the organization is set up cannot take a change. You know, as Kurt Lewin once said, if you want to find out how an organization works, try changing it. Try changing it. It's the same with people. You know, if I want to know how you work, try changing you. Are you coming to the netball match this evening with me? No. You don't like netball? I can inculcate a love of netball in you. No problem. Right. So the 7th one that no one really has learned is to do the right metrics. Evaluation is notoriously bad in this area, and people tend to use very traditional ROI, cost-benefit analysis. So we had to invent a new framework, total value of ownership. And what it does is it says the first thing you need to be honest about is what is the total cost of ownership? What are all the activities you have to do, and how much are the resources that you have to bring to bear to deliver those activities? So get that out first. But the really interesting area that people are really bad at is the 3 E's that we've invented here. People are quite good at being able to invent metrics for efficiency. They're not so good at inventing metrics for effectiveness. But because they've never really aspired to having a robust, flexible automation platform, they're very poor at enablement. Enablement is the idea that once you've got a platform, so many more opportunities open for you that you can choose from. Without the platform, innovation is so much more difficult to achieve within your organization. So we've got a series of metrics that you need to be looking at in order to develop people's ambition to aspire much more highly to what they can achieve with automation. Okay. So very quick distillation at a highly aggregate level is the 7 action principles. As I said, they actually break down into 47. But the first thing is that none of this is going to be strategic if you don't start with business imperatives. If you just get blinded by the magic of the technology, you won't be doing very much. You have to become strategic from the start. You can't really build up to it anymore. You haven't got enough time. The leaders are going to get away in your sector, and the gap increasingly is going to be very difficult to fill with this kind of technology and all the digital technologies. There's a very good McKinsey report on that, which is well worth reading, and I'll give you the reference if any of you want it. It has to be driven by senior business executives. The IT function can't do this by itself, nor can the business units. You have to build your own core technical and sourcing capabilities initially to be able to understand and gain traction and know-how, especially as there is a growing skills shortage in this area. You have to listen to the technology in the AI marketplace very closely. Believe you me, I do, and it changes every 3 months quite significantly. You really do have to see this as an opportunity to do re-engineering. And you never should forget that you're actually embarking upon an organizational and behavioral change program. Okay? So that's a distillation, really, of what we're on about. But we now move into the more exciting area, I think, of what's next in my last 15 minutes. What's next? And of course, very often, people are so eager for the future that they try to move it into the present. That's what's happening with the AI debate. You know, they're all so excited about the possibilities, they want to now say, it's actually happening now. The future is pushing out the present, as it were, in our rhetoric. But the reality is not there. So let's have a look what is there. You'll be aware of some high-profile victories with what has been called AI, but is in fact cognitive automation. Most of them that you will hear about are games, or sort of one-off approaches to using the technology. And that's one of the weaknesses of these technologies. They're very good at doing one thing, but trying to get them to do lots of different things, especially at the same time, is quite difficult. And it takes years to get these things to work as well as they did in order to beat poor old Gary Kasparov, for example. Has anyone ever read the book by Gary Kasparov on deep thinking about how he got beaten by IBM? It's quite interesting because they weren't actually have the same rules. So, for example, Gary Kasparov, the machine, if it broke down or malfunctioned, it was allowed a timeout. Gary Kasparov wasn't, number one. Number two, then, although they say it's the machine that's done the work, the machine was being fed by grand chess masters on a daily basis. So it wasn't quite the machine versus Gary Kasparov. And people also forget that at the time, he did win a few, I think. I can't remember. but he got thrown by something the machine did that he thought meant that it was thinking more deeply than he ever thought it could, because it doesn't think at all, it just operates. But, you know, you get this thing when you look at machines and you think they're actually got human qualities. So he got thrown psychologically and he lost the rest of his matches. Anyway, enough of that. The defeats are more interesting in some ways. IBM Watson, unfortunately, it wasn't built by IBM, but built by the press as IBM Cures Cancer. It didn't at a Texan cancer center, and that blew $63 million before it fell over. You'll be aware of the Microsoft Tay Tweets story, I suspect, where it was all too successful and behaved like millennials do, and ended up with racist, sexist, extremely rude language in its interchanges with people using it, so they had to bring that one down. I was intrigued by this one. No one knows very much about the invisible boyfriend. I interviewed the CEO because I was in St. Louis, Texas, Missouri, where my co-author works, and I said, "Oh, you'd be interested in this one." I went along, and evidently this was a cognitive automation tool whereby I suspect women could have an invisible boyfriend and chat with them over email and things like that, and we get knowledgeable responses. Well, I talked to the CEO, and she said, well, actually, it didn't work. They didn't get knowledgeable responses. So that led to me employing people to do the job of the machine while advertising it as a technology. I said, oh, that's very interesting. And I said, I can think of a new word then, artificial intelligence, which I thought was rather clever. Anyway, and she said, yeah, but it's even funnier than that, really, Leslie. She said, because most of the people who I employ are women, talking to women. So anyway, that's an interesting area, because a book recently has been written called Ghost Work, which suggests that an awful lot of work is being done, supposedly by automation tools, but actually by millions of workers, because the machines can't do the actual work. For example, you know, when the visual image processing tries to identify a cat, people have to identify whole ranges of pictures as cat or not cat in order to produce the training data for the machine. And this happens for so many things. So there's an awful lot of people actually employed, you know, employment growth as a result of these technologies. So the promise is, as I said, very big, and I have no doubt that this is going to develop and accelerate. And basically, this is what we're looking at this year, really coming on board. I mentioned them all before, all these things, and each of them by themselves are very exciting, and when you start combining them, I think it's going to get really, really very interesting. Interesting fact, though, technologies don't happen overnight. They don't get deployed to their full potential overnight. The figure that we've got, looking at waves of technology, is it takes between 8 and 26 years for a technology, set of technologies like this, to become fully deployed in our economies. 8 to 26 years. So another reason why, you know, the job killer issue needs to be flagged. But what we're increasingly finding as we employ more of this stuff is that there are downsides, and actually there are limitations to the technology. And I'm only going to hint at a few of them here, but the biggest one that people are coming onto is the data. They've realized that for decades they've really mismanaged data. And they now discover that they can't do that anymore, because these technologies depend very much on good data. You can't just take a load of data, put it in, and then it'll sort it out. It doesn't happen like that. And the problem is that on a typical traditional organization like a bank, only about 15 to 18% of its data is usable for business critical processes. 15%. Everything else is difficult to access, difficult to understand, fuzzy images, duplicated data, very dirty data, unused data, data that they haven't labeled properly, that you can't dig up and utilize in any meaningful way. So you've got that problem. Then you've got the problems of machine learning, which we'll come on to in the next slide. But all that pales into insignificance when you start looking at trying to deploy those technologies into specific contexts. And this is precisely the reason why driverless vehicles are going to run into a lot of problems. And there's going to be this big delay in fully automated driverless vehicles, because what they are trying to implement it into is a context that is unpredictable, dynamic, complex, which cannot be fully understood by however many trackers and sensors you put out there. It's just not. You can think, the unanticipated, unpredictable situations that these driverless vehicles are going to run into are just too big. So, you can think of examples. We could sit here for 40 minutes and think of examples why driverless vehicles would really have a problem going down Chiswick High Street or around Trafalgar Square. So I'll give you one. One that occurs to me. And I said, well, all right, so driverless vehicles now are fairly proficient, and they run down the high street, and they're perfectly safe, aren't they? Yes, but human beings know that. So are human beings going to stop and let a driverless vehicle go down the road? Or are they going to say, it's a driverless vehicle. I'm not going to get hurt. I'm going to step in front of the car. I'm not going to use the zebra crossing anymore. So immediately your traffic comes to a halt. Now, you know humans as well as I do. You happen to be one of them. Most of you. I don't think there are any robots in today. So you know humans are going to behave like that, don't you? I mean, you know as well as I ride a bicycle, there's a zebra crossing coming up, and I now know, not that a driverless vehicle would know, is that someone is going to cross by not looking to the right, get out their phone, and start looking at it and walk across the zebra crossing. I also know that they won't walk straight across. If they're going that way, they'll walk across at an angle, that way. Or if they're going that way, they'll walk that way. How do you factor for this in a driverless vehicle? Human behavior. I have no idea. So I come up with a nice, we've got about another 4 minutes, so we might have to miss some of this, but never mind. I've come up with this nice acronym. It's not nice at all, actually. It's Boggs Habib. It's the best I could do after 3 days to pick out the 9 serious problems with cognitive automation and AI. And then each one problem has an ethical implication when you think about it. First of all, they're brittle. They only do one thing extremely well. They can't do what a 6-year-old does and never probably will be able to. They're opaque. You don't know how they work. You don't know how they get to their conclusions. Now, we're working on it, but that has issues. They're greedy. They need huge amounts of training data. We're trying to cut down on that, but they still are very greedy. They're shallow. They don't understand context. They don't understand meaning. They're not mindful. They miss out a lot of the things that humans are very good at. We all know they're hackable. We know that they have no moral compass, so we have to program that in. Whose morality do we program in? I mean, we're both nice people, but I bet your morality is different from mine. So, how do you arrive at the moral compass for every situation? I just find it very difficult. We all know that they're biased. We're catching up with that one. They're partly biased by the bias inherent in the data coming into the machine. And after that, there's another set of questions. We know that they do, harm, invade privacy and security, and we know that they're inherently fakeable. You can We should have a photograph of you in a place where you shouldn't be. It's not you, but they put your head on the shoulders and it looks like your body. It's fakeable, and it happens all the time. It can happen all the time. And it's, at every level, it's fakeable. So this is a massive area, ladies and gentlemen, that we can only skim on at the moment. I just want to also get to this bit very quickly. I've just got about 4 minutes left for my time. I just want to kill this notion that automation is a job killer, at least over the next 12 years. There are very good reasons for believing that it's not going to be. The previous slide showed 5 reports that were recent by independent people, well regarded, who've looked at it seriously, and the conclusion is that the net job loss globally from automation between now and 2030 will be minus 1%. 1%. Not 47%, which is the anchor figure from a 2014 study done by my colleagues at Oxford University, but 1%. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be massive skill shifts. It doesn't mean that some jobs are going to be lost and some jobs are going to be gained, but the net job lost is minus 1% on the best estimate so far. And I tend to think that it would be a bit higher than that, but nevertheless, that it is. So let me just go through why this job killer story is not a very good one. The first thing is that technology will not replace whole jobs. It will replace parts of jobs. Potentially, sort of 60% of jobs can be automated 30% over the next 12 years. That's the figure that we've got. So it's not whole jobs lost. Secondly, you've got to factor in job creation. A lot of the early studies on job loss ignored job creation, thinking it was negligible. That's not the history of information technology, which is a history of net job gains over a period of time. The third thing is that the speed of technology deployment has been grossly overestimated. It takes enormous amounts of time for organizations to implement automation, as has been true of previous technologies. The fourth thing is that the perfectibility of the technology has been grossly overestimated. I've indicated just a little bit what I mean by that, but we're not in the area of being a perfect technology. The fifth thing is that when you look at macro factors, demographics, aging populations, decline in birth rates, that sort of factor has got to be brought into bear in our societies before you start saying that this is a job killer. It might be a coping mechanism. Sixthly, there are massive skills and productivity shortfalls across the top 21 economies in the globe, and automation might well be a coping mechanism to counteract those shortfalls. The eighth factor I will put up here is that people grossly underestimate the distinctive human skills that cannot be replicated anytime soon through these technologies. One study recently by McKinsey suggested that of 18 skill sets we bring to work, only 7 could be automated, and the other 11, 2 could be automated over the next 15 years, but the others would be largely have to be human skills. The seventh factor is my baby, my only originality here, except for bringing the synthesis together. All studies fail to identify a fundamental fact. It's a very strange omission. It's a black hole in all studies, which they will catch up on this year, because I'm publishing as much as I can about this. All the studies assume that jobs, the number of jobs and the number of people in employment will remain stable. Okay? And the amount of work to be done will also remain stable. But the amount of work to be done is dramatically increasing. You all know that. You experience it on a daily basis. And I know the reasons for that, and I write about the reasons for that, and we can talk about it. But my estimate is that every year, the amount of work to be done in the top 20 economies, which account for 82% of global economic GDP, the amount of work to be done increases every year by about 15 to 20%. Now, I'm just making that figure up, but it's a ballpark figure. But if someone bat against me and come up with another figure, but if you're talking about the exponential data explosion, which is doubling the amount of data in the world every 2 years, and think of the amount of work to be done to deal with that and to process that and to take advantage of that. If you think about what you're all experiencing, the dramatic increase in audit, regulation, and bureaucracy across all sectors, and if you think about the amount of problems technology generates as well as solutions, and add all that together, I would bet it's about 15% dramatic increase in work per annum across these groups. Now, people say, always point to technology as a job killer. It actually is a job creator in this sense because it falls over a lot. So just give you one example, cybersecurity is now an $180 billion a year market. Exponential growth in the number of people. If you want a job, get into cybersecurity. You've got a job for life. It's great. You know, get your hacker skills sorted. It's a great area. So these are the 8 reasons why we have to seriously qualify what we're thinking about when we talk about job loss, serious job loss. I'm not saying that there are not jobs that are going to be highly hit. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there's going to be a lot of other jobs. And the big issue is the skill shift. This is the last slide, which is that when I synthesized it out, I love this diagram actually because it took ages to get to, but it looks very simple. But we're moving from a world where 44% of the jobs are somewhere on the left-hand side of that diagram to a world where 32% of the jobs will be on the left-hand side of the diagram, and increasingly the ones that are really well paid will be on the right-hand side of this diagram. So you've got to get yourselves aligned, and I show this to all our students these days, with the 2030 skill set if you really want to be earning money and guaranteeing your future. And notice that part of that is distinctive human skills. You know, the people who are very good communicators, the people who can delegate, the people who can lead, the people who have empathy, these are hugely valuable people in the future. So don't knock your human strength in the future. They might be highly valuable. Right, so that's it, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to know more, there's some leaflets there. There's a copy of the latest book, came out last week, and there are 3 others that we did before. There's lots of free stuff on roboticandcognitiveautomation.com, and if you want to buy a book, you can buy one online. It's not available in bookshops. We discovered that we make a lot more money selling it online. Publishing ourselves, by the way.